Hello class, welcome back. We're going to talk about what is knowledge today. So we've been going through epistemology. We started talking about reason. We went over the reason handout. Then we talked about skepticism and fideism, roadblocks to knowledge. Skepticism says knowledge is not possible. Fideism says knowledge is not possible. You just have to believe anyway. And we've been clearing the ground of that skepticism. We went over popular skepticism and responses to that. We went over sources of skepticism. And lastly, we went over the informal fallacies. Now we're asking this question, what is knowledge? And how do we define it? What is it? And how can we get knowledge? This is my favorite topic, one of my favorite topics, and I've written 2 books about it. I just want to give you a heads up in case you're interested in getting those at the library, PVCC library. The first book I want to mention is called Retrieving Knowledge, A Socratic Response to Skepticism. This is in the Buxton Library. It is a big book. It's a history book too, so I know students aren't inclined to read, but I wrote it for you. The other book, I don't know if this is in the library. I think it is, but it's a smaller book. And it's called Reason and Proper Function, a response to Alvin Plantinga, which we're going to talk about today. This was based on my master's thesis. The other book was based on my dissertation. And yeah, if you have any questions about those books, just reach out to me and I can give you more information. They're on Amazon. You don't necessarily have to buy them, though. You can go to the library and get them. Check it out. Okay, so let's talk about what is knowledge. Now, a famous philosopher named Edmund Gettier writes a small paper in the 1960s called Is Justified True Belief Knowledge? And maybe I'll give you a reference to that. In that paper, he suggests that knowledge is defined as justified true belief. And then he goes on to show we can't ever have that. So he kind of sets off this discussion about knowledge. But he also claims, actually I'm wrong, Alvin Plantinga responds to Edmund Gettier in a 3-volume set that I have down here, 3-volume set of Plantinga's books. He says this definition of justified true belief goes back to Plato. Remember, Plato was the student of Socrates, so 300s before Common Era, and everyone took it for granted that justified true belief was knowledge until Gettier calls it into question. In my book, Retrieving Knowledge, I question that history a little bit and whether Plato really thought knowledge is justified true belief. I will tell you what I think after we go through this handout. Okay, so this is what I want you to know for the test, because you always want to know what's the core question from this handout. All right, the core question from this handout is what is the definition of knowledge? And here's the one we're going to use. Knowledge may be defined as justified true belief. And then I'm going to ask you, what are 2 kinds of justification? Justified true belief. 2 kinds of justification are going to come down here, weak and strong. Okay, I'm going to tell you about those and I want you to tell me what those mean. But we have to get there. So let's start with justified true belief. Now, Gettier states it this way. A person, S, subject, knows a proposition, P. If and only if P is true, the proposition is true, the person believes the proposition, P, and S is justified in believing P. So, let's do it this way. Dr. Burton knows something must be eternal if and only if something is eternal is true. Dr. Burton believes something is eternal, and Dr. Burton is justified in believing something is eternal. Okay, you see how this goes? Now, let's talk about what a belief is. In class, I would put this on the board and say, what is a belief? What happens up here when you believe something? What does it feel like on the inside to believe something? Everyone believes things, and beliefs aren't necessarily bad. Actually, you can't avoid it. Every time you make a judgment, you have a belief. So if I say the Apple Pencil's on the table, I believe the Apple Pencil's on the table, right? Kino's over here on the floor, I believe that Kino's on the floor, right? So we're affirming a proposition. My car is in the parking lot. There's not really a parking lot here. There's just a drive. My car is in the drive. I'm affirming that sentence. I'm affirming my car is in the drive. So when you believe something, you're affirming it. True. What is truth anyway? What a good topic. What is truth? I gave a talk at PVCC on this once. It was such a good talk. There's an audio recording of it on my website if you're interested. retphi.com, my website. And just look for the What is Truth talk. But what is truth? We should talk about it here too, right? Truth is what is according to reality. In philosophy, this is called the correspondence view of truth. There's something else called this is the correspondence view of truth. The other one is called the what? Oh, the coherentist view of truth. Correspondence, coherence. Correspondence view of truth is that when I believe the Apple Pencil is on the table, that belief, that judgment, that proposition matches reality. So if I say my car is in the parkway, what do you call it? I don't know. It's not a garage. My car's in the parking lot. If I say that sentence, that proposition, if the car's actually there, then that proposition is true. So sentences matching reality is called the correspondence view of truth. Now, in my book, I talk about how that view fell out of favor. Now we have something called the coherence view of truth, which is, I don't know if it's very popular, but some philosophers promote this view. And it's that we really can't know reality outside of our head. So true is when the web of belief that we have is coherent, meaning the parts fit together. We don't have contradictory views in our system. It's basically the constructive use of reason without the critical use of reason. I'm not going with that view because I think it's mistaken. And if you want to know why, read the big green book in the library. Truth is what is according to reality. Okay, so if I say Kino's on the floor, it's true that Kino's on the floor if Kino's actually on the floor right there. All right, what is justification, though? Justification is the piece that Gettier, Edmund Gettier, calls into question, and I'm going to have to give you examples that are going to hurt your head, but I must do it because you need to know why skepticism is here with us unless we get rid of it. We can't get rid of it unless we properly identify its causes. So justification is what guarantees we have a true belief. And it may turn out that we can't guarantee everything. Like, I may be able to give a sound argument that something is eternal, and I know that certainly, but maybe I can't give you an argument that Kino's really here on the floor. I mean, how do you know? You can't even see him. Maybe I'm making him up. Maybe he's a fictional character. Or maybe Kino and I are both fictional characters in a video game right now. People play with that stuff, right? How do you know we're not in a dream right now? So we need a guarantee of true belief. We need a guarantee that my belief matches reality. Edmund Gettier gave a lot of examples that makes us question our justification. I'll give you a few, and I'm just going to talk, and you can imagine. There's some videos you can look up. If you just Google the Gettier problem or Gettier example, you'll see videos. There's some cute ones out there. So let me give you a couple. There are hundreds of examples like this. Gettier's own example, I'll give you first, and it's, I don't know. It could get confusing, but just think of it this way. There's a man, let's call him Jones, who has a boss, and Jones also has a coworker. So here's Jones, here's the boss, here's the coworker. Coworker's name is Smith. Jones, Smith, boss. One day, the boss calls Jones in and says, "Hey Jones, the man with 10 coins in his pocket is going to be promoted by the end of the day." Jones knows that Smith has 10 coins in his pocket. And so Jones makes the inference that Smith is going to receive a promotion at the end of the day. Well, at the end of the day, the boss calls Jones in, and boss says, "Hey Jones, you got a promotion." And Jones says, "Hey, wait, boss, I thought the man with 10 coins in his pocket was going to get a promotion." And boss says, "Jones, you have 10 coins in your pocket." And Jones goes, I believed that the man with 10 coins in his pocket was going to get a promotion. I believed Smith had 10 coins in his pocket, and so I believed Smith was going to get a promotion, and I was justified because the boss told me the man with 10 coins was going to get a promotion, but in the end of the day I was wrong." So Edmund Gettier uses this as an example where a person had justified true belief but did not have knowledge. Now, I'm going to let you analyze the problem and see, did he really have justification, or was he just taking, was he just assuming that the boss meant Smith, and he's taking the boss's words for it? He's based on testimony. Testimony is not strong enough to be justification, but we will let that pass for a moment, and we'll give you another example. This is my favorite. It comes from a philosopher named Roderick Chisholm, who was dealing with these Gettier problems. Chisholm gives us this example. Imagine you're out walking and you see what you believe is a sheep on a hill. And you're like, "Oh wow, check it out, a sheep." And in the area, you smell sheep, you hear the bleating of sheep, it smells a little sheepy out, so you form the belief there's a sheep on the hill. And you walk away with that belief. Now, it turns out what you saw was not really a sheep, it was a sheep-shaped rock. But behind the sheep-shaped rock was a real sheep. So, do you have knowledge that there's a sheep on the hill? Gettier would have us believe, I guess it's Chisholm, would have us believe that it's true there's a sheep on the hill. You believe there's a sheep on the hill, and you're justified because you have all this evidence of sheepiness in the area, so you have justified true belief, but you don't have knowledge. See? Skepticism. Okay, so maybe Gettier raises a good point, that a person could have justified true belief and not have knowledge, but what is this justification? What kind of justification is Gettier giving us? So far we have testimony and evidence from our senses. Is that strong enough to give us certainty? I don't think so. I think even science would tell us. Science gives us probability. The scientific method isn't certain, ever. Okay, so this is where Alvin Plantinga comes in. I'm going to mention this little book, but it's a response to his 3-part series. Plantinga responds to Gettier. Okay, so here, let me back up 1 minute. Gettier thinks that justified true belief is not sufficient for knowledge. It's not good enough. You need something more. Plantinga is going to say it's not even necessary. Justification is not necessary for knowledge. He's going to change the definition of knowledge a bit. He's going to say that knowledge is warranted true belief. So he has this whole series about warrant. He's going to say a belief is warranted if it is formed by cognitive faculties functioning properly in an appropriate environment according to a good design plan. I know all this stuff. You don't need to know this for the test, but it may be interesting to you. Plantinga is still a very famous philosopher. He won the Templeton Prize. It's like $1 million prize for his contribution to philosophy of religion. He won that about 2 years ago. So he's a very famous guy, and you'll maybe encounter his ideas. But let me go over it again. A belief is warranted if it is formed by cognitive faculties functioning properly, so brains are working right in an appropriate environment where brains are made to work, not on Alpha Centauri or some other planet, and they're functioning properly according to a good design plan. Now, here's the problem, and this is also where I'm going to show you begging the question, arguing in a circle, which is an informal fallacy. Plantinga knows it, though, and he embraces the circle. So, a good design plan also has as part of it that your cognitive faculties form beliefs they spontaneously form certain beliefs, like this. There is an external world. There are other minds. If I recall having eggs for breakfast, I had eggs for breakfast, memory beliefs. And you will also form the belief that God exists. Plantinga calls these properly basic beliefs. And they're properly basic because God made you such that your cognitive faculties, when functioning properly, will normally form these beliefs. Now here's the circle. The good design plan builds in that you will form the belief that God exists, and you believe God exists because there's a good design plan. This is a circular argument, but Plantinga knows that, and he says, well, I can't help it. That's just what I believe. There are doubts and there are objections, and he's going to recognize that. So let me break this down into smaller pieces. First, we have his definition, warrant. And in this definition, you don't have to be justified in having those properly basic beliefs. You just find yourself with those beliefs, and you're warranted in having those beliefs. But when you face an objection to those properly basic beliefs, then you have to come up with a counter argument. So let's give an example. Person A has a properly basic belief that God exists. They meet person B. Person B does not believe that God exists. So person B is a defeater to person A's warrant. Now they are no longer warranted in believing that. They are without warrant. And so what they have to do is person A needs to come up with a defeater for person B's objection. And now person B can come up with a defeater, and person A can come up with a defeater, and you can see this is skepticism again, right? No one ever lands anywhere. Here's the problem. This defeater stuff is the same as justification. So Plantinga, in trying to get rid of justification, allows justification to enter in through the back door. So we need to grapple with what is the problem that both Plantinga and Gettier are struggling with, and why can't we make any progress with skepticism or fideism. Plantinga ends up in fideism. He's a Christian philosopher. All right, so let's pause and see, what can we do about this? Well, we can first notice that both Plantinga and Gettier are called empiricists in their epistemology. They both believe all of our knowledge is through the senses. And Plantinga thinks the evidence for belief in God is just the beauty of the physical world. It's evidence through the senses. Your senses should tell you there's a God. I don't know. There are people who their senses tell you there's a lot of suffering and evil in the world. Or look at what nature does. Those are defeaters, counter arguments. So we need to defeat the defeater by giving a real argument. So what we're going to do is have to not use our senses to engage in philosophical topics. So I argue in my big green book, Retrieving Knowledge, that the problem of skepticism goes back to empiricism. And we can correct this by just doing one thing. We can talk about weak and strong justification. So justification is what guarantees true belief, and we could talk about two kinds of justification, and it depends on the kind of thing we're talking about. So weak justification is sensory data, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, that leads to a high probability of truth. Weak justification is what we use in science, how we try to justify our scientific conclusions. It's only good for high probability of truth. For example, if I saw my car in the parking lot, I have a high probability of believing that it's highly probable that it's true that my belief, the car's in the parking lot, is true, matches reality. But I could be wrong. Someone may have stolen the car, or maybe I'm misremembering, right? So I have weak justification, and I'm going to suggest this is good enough for most of our everyday beliefs. It's good enough that there's a high probability of truth that my car's in the parking lot. But for more serious beliefs that have consequences for the meaning of your life, you need strong justification. And strong justification is needed for philosophical assumptions, particularly what is real and what is eternal. I mean, what is the good life? Sorry. So strong justification is by reason and argument such that the opposite contradiction is impossible. And we did this kind of arguing when I showed you something must be eternal. Remember, some is eternal is true because the contradiction nothing is eternal means all is temporal, all came into being from non-being, which is impossible, violates the laws of thought. So that position's impossible, so the contradiction necessarily is true. That's what we're looking for in knowledge claims about philosophy, strong justification. To believe the conclusion of a sound argument because the argument is seen as sound is to possess knowledge. So I need to talk to you about arguments next time. But let's wrap up this handout. The three conditions of justified true belief are said to be necessary and sufficient for knowledge. These conditions have been challenged as being neither necessary nor sufficient, Plantinga and Gettier, but the challenge is plausible only until an ambiguity in understanding the third condition of justification is clarified. They were using senses, and only by focusing on secondary rather than primary beliefs. Okay, so we can fix the problem with the definition of knowledge by saying knowledge is justified true belief, and there are two kinds of justification: weak justification, which leads to a high probability of truth, and strong justification, which is by reason and argument. And in philosophy, we're looking for strong justification, and if we're careful and we think critically, we can have that. So that's what I want to show you next: reason and argument, and then we're going to move into metaphysics and see if we can use this method to get knowledge about what is real. I hope you're excited. I am excited, and I will see you in the next video.